Okay, Chinese fighter jets are conducting unsafe maneuvers near U.S. aircraft. What happened? It was in around the South China Sea. This is a contentious area right in the South China Sea. The Hague voted that China has no rights in the area. China is very disappointed and China said basically, up yours to the Hague. They said, now the Hague, if you don't know what it is, the World Court. It's the court of the West. And they upheld a ruling that China has no claims to the areas in the South China Sea. China's been making these islands in there from nothing. They didn't exist before. China's been pumping sand, dredging it off the bottom of the floor of the ocean, and making islands where there weren't islands anymore. And now China's been equipping these islands with weaponry, and they're very defensive over defensive and offensive over this area. China is very protective over this area, and because all these claims are disputed, it makes it a very contentious hotbed for a war to erupt in South China. Now, you think of a war between China and America, the first thing you think of over here in the West, people think of is, okay, nuclear war and all-out extermination and death and destruction and everything else. No, that's not what it would be. It would be a small territorial dispute war between the United States and China. But what would it cause if China and the United States went to war over the South China Sea? What would the effects be? Now, let me read you a little bit more about this incident that happened. Chinese fighter jets conduct an unsafe maneuver near the United States aircraft. Washington, from CNN, 2 Chinese J-10 fighter jets conducted unsafe maneuvers while intercepting a United States surveillance aircraft that was operating in international airspace near the South China Sea, according to the Navy. The incident occurred on Wednesday. It's involving the second contentious encounter involving the United States and Chinese aircraft over the last week. See, it's over this disputed area in the South China Sea. This is a hotbed for a war to erupt, believe it or not, between China and the United States. A U.S. official told CNN that one Chinese fighter flew 200 yards in front of a U.S. P-3 spy plane. Now, they flew in front of the P-3 spy plane. Now, the P-3 spy plane was probably going rather fast at the time. They flew in front 200 yards. Now, when those planes are flying, do you know how if quick they can make up 200 yards? In a fraction of a second. So this means that they flew, they were grandstanding, the Chinese. They flew right in front of the nose of our P-3 plane. And honest to Pete, I'm going to tell you, that must have just put their heart in the throats of those pilots to have a Chinese fighter jet fly 200 yards right in front of them. Because I guarantee you they made up that 200 yards in less than a second and they flew through the path of that Chinese fighter jet. And they did it multiple times. It said that these planes made multiple turns and maneuvers, and they deemed these maneuvers unsafe because they restricted the ability of the Navy plane to fly. They were terrifying, these pilots, the Chinese were. Now, these fighter jet pilots, these Chinese fighter jet pilots are par excellence. They know exactly what they were doing. They were terrifying the men on board the P-3 plane for a period of time. And they probably breathed an awful sigh of relief when the Chinese finally flew away. And this wasn't right to do. But the Chinese are warning. What they're doing basically is they're warning this P-3. Because they could have shot this P-3 down. Because they're fighter jets. These fighters. And this isn't the only incident that's occurring in the area. The United States has a right to sail through that region. And it's freedom of the ocean, freedom of navigation. They have a right to sail through this area. And the Chinese have claimed this area from nothing. They're claiming this area. And the Chinese are getting more and more aggressive in their claiming of this area. I've told you before, the Chinese are not our friends. I'm going to read you a little something right now. SINO, North Korean Mutual Aid and Cooperation Friendship Treaty. It was signed in 1961. It's been redone over again, but let me just read you the nuts and bolts of this treaty between North Korea and China. It said, the treaty declares that the two nations, North Korea and China, guarantee to adopt all immediate necessary measures to oppose any country or coalition of countries that might attack either nation. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, and they don't know what it means. I'm going to tell you exactly what this treaty means. It means North Korea and China are joined at the hip. They're married. They're like a married couple. They're joined at the hip with this treaty, and they are, if you bother one of them, you bother the other one of them. And they're working together. This is what it means. It means that they are buddies. Not the United States and China. They're not buddies. China has got a manifest destiny, and they mean to take over different regions and stuff and enslave other regions. And this is all their plan with gold, that they've been sucking all the gold out of the West. And we've been fool enough to give it to them and let them have it. And they've probably got in excess of 24,000 tons. And they're not claiming it on their books, but that's probably what they've got, probably up to 24,000 tons. Now, you want to know what's left in our gold vaults? A few little canisters and stuff from World War II, with a few pennies and stuff and things in them, and also dangerous chemicals. That's all that's left in Fort Knox. Our vaults are all empty. Queen's vaults. They've taken all the gold out of the Queen's vaults, and they've done what's called Rehypothecation, which basically amounts to is they sign a paper. The ones that are in charge of the gold over here in the West sign a paper that says we're going to sell the gold into the gold market, and at a certain time we'll buy it back. It's called leasing. It's called gold leasing. And they say that it makes sense because it costs a lot to store the gold in the vaults and everything. And this way the gold doesn't have to be stored or watched or anything. We just put it into the market and we'll buy it back at a certain time in the future. And everything's hunky-dory. It's all this nice and neat on paper and everything else. It looks great. Meanwhile, the guys that are in charge of the gold who sell the gold off are able to reap the rewards of the benefits of the money that they get for the gold. And they know that by the time that gold has to be bought back and put back into the vaults, that they won't be in office anymore, that they'll be long gone and they'll be retired. Right? This is a racket. Now, but what does happen when they have to buy that gold back? And China's bought all that rehypothecated gold, all that gold that's out on lease. What happens? You think the Chinese are going to give that gold back? The Chinese got a plan, boys. And it involves gold, and it involves making their currency the world reserve currency, and doodly-doo to the dollar. And they don't care what happens to us when the dollar goes down, as long as it doesn't happen to them. And they're working with North Korea. I've just read you this treaty here, the SINO, North Korea Mutual Aid and Cooperation Friendship Treaty with China. They're working together. And now China is down there in the south, in the China Sea, and they're doing this to our fighter jets. They're using their fighter jets to terrify our poor planes. Those planes are not equipped to be an offensive weapon. They're a defensive weapon, and they're only flying maneuvers where they're supposed to fly in international waters, and they're being terrorized. And I'm going to tell you what, North Korea means to blow America up into a sea of fire. And all of this is going to end up in a war in the end. That's where it's heading. It's heading toward a war. But you think it's heading toward a nuclear exchange between United States and China? No, that's not what it's heading toward. It's heading toward a regional war down in that area around North Korea and the South China Sea and all in that area in there. And it's heading toward a war in that area. A skirmish type of war. But what that skirmish war would lead to, it would lead to a massive embargoes and trade, stoppage of trade. China and the United States would be enemies then at that point once that war breaks out. And the enemies, you don't trade with the enemy. And so what would happen is trade would come to a stop, and I'm going to tell you what the effect of that would be, boys. I'm going to tell you what the effect of that would be. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Because there's been a huge sucking sound coming from America. And who do you think's made China rich over the years? We're over here in America, we're making them rich. Every time we go to the store and we buy a pair of shoes that's made in China, you wear the things 1 week and the sole falls off. They're no good. And that means you got to buy another pair. And it just keeps going and going and going, and they keep getting richer and richer over there. We've been making them rich. Do you know that they were over there working on the rice paddies and didn't hardly have a pot to pee in. They had trouble getting a pot to pee in. They were so poor at one time, and now they're so rich, and they got rich on the backs of us. And at the same time, all of our jobs went overseas. We were rich then. We're not rich anymore. Where do you think the money all went? It was sucking sound to China. So if a war breaks out, that sucking sound will automatically come to a stop. Now, I'm not advocating war. Not at all. I'm just saying the effects of what's going to happen if a war begins over there with China. And the thing is this war, I see it as it being inevitable because of North Korea and North Korea's aggressiveness. And if they do decide that they're not going to go to war with North Korea, they're just going to let North Korea continue to proliferate, then North Korea will start it anyway. But you're not going to like how North Korea starts it. Believe me, because it's going to be some sort of a sneaky strike that you're not expecting, and a lot of your loved ones are probably going to die. It's going to be something really dirty, the way North Korea does it when they start it. And it might come a year from now or 2 years from now. If you just sit and fold your hands and not do nothing, you're going to get some sort of a sneaky strike. A real sneaky strike when you're not expecting it. You're laying in bed and you're asleep at night. And some sneaky ICBM's going to come flying over and boom, right over top of the center of America or something. And it's going to be some sort of sneaky strike. We'll cope. We'll survive it. It might cost us a lot, but we'll survive it. And we'll come back and we'll stink them, give them everything that they asked for. They'll wish they'd never messed with us. Because we're some of the best fighters. But that's not the best way to start this whole thing off. That's not the way to go. But that's the way it will go if we just sit and twiddle our thumbs. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next article. Bye.